Okay, here are some other explanations of underachievement in bilinguals. The first one is if both English language learners' languages are underdeveloped. And again, this happens when their first language is not continually supported or maintained, and they have not very much of a stable foundation on which to build their English language skills. And so even though they're being taught English in school and perhaps helped to try and progress in English, because those first language skills are not solidified, their ability to progress in English is difficult as well. Okay. Obviously, well-developed bilingualism offers many cognitive advantages. So again, as teachers, you should be really encouraging everybody in the English language learners family to help them continue learning that first language and maintain all of those first language skills. The type of school that the child attends may have an influence on how that bilingual child might do. Especially if it's not a strong form of bilingual education, or if it's an English-only program, that may have something to do with the ability of the child to do well in school. Also, there could be a mismatch between the English language learner's language, their culture, their values, their beliefs, with what they know well from home and what they encounter in school. Those cultural values may be very much in clash. Socioeconomic factors also really hinder a student from doing as well as they could, especially if they don't have enough money to have the different books at home, to have a computer in which to do assignments. Perhaps they have to work in order to help the family survive. All of those aspects can obviously hinder a student from developing English as quick as you would expect. This also includes parents' attitudes about education, how recently they've immigrated, and feelings around being in the US. Perhaps the student does not feel comfortable or misses home. And as I said, the family environment and the presence of print at home. Okay, so when thinking about appropriate assessment of these bilingual students for special education placement, there's a number of things that have to be considered. The first thing is the diversity of measurement and observation devices. So there has to be multiple sources of evidence, including teacher recommendation, observation, and parent interview, as well as the tests. Any temporary difficulties that come in as a phase sort of are observed but then fade. All of those should not be included in the reports. These things include silent period, language loss, language transfer, any code switching. We know that those are all normal, natural processes of language development, so they should not be included in that report. The appropriate tests should be used. Obviously, non-verbal IQ tests rather than verbal tests, right? The results of verbal tests are going to be not going to be valid because the child is still learning that language, still learning English. Also, do not want to test sort of these language skills without in different ways than they would actually be used, or separate from a context that would help to make them make sense. You also do not want to translate any tests because that might make the subject that the test is trying to measure appear to be very different than it would be in English. We're going to get into assessment in the next couple of weeks. These tests should be normed on bilinguals, and if the test has not been created in that first language and normed on bilingual students in that language, then they should be assessed in their stronger language, or assessed in their first language if it's appropriate. Comparisons should not be made between monolingual children who have taken that test and bilingual children. It's almost like comparing apples and oranges because they represent very different profiles. Okay, a bilingual child knows very different things and many more things than a monolingual child, but not in the same ways. So if you were going to test the vocabulary of the monolingual child with the vocabulary knowledge of in English of the bilingual child, you're going to see that obviously the monolingual child knows more at that point because they've had much more time to learn the amount that they know. Okay? But in comparison, that bilingual child, if you put together what they know in English versus what they know in that other language and add that up, that ends up being usually more than what the monolingual child knows. So again, it's like comparing apples and oranges. You definitely don't want to make that comparison, and that's not a fair or valid comparison. Knowledge of child's language experience. Again, this is stuff that you would get from the parent interview. You want to know what age they were exposed to English, that second language, how much time they get in English a day, a week, and how they're progressing relative to those around them, right? Siblings or other students who have the same level of English. Also, knowledge of children's individual characteristics, their backgrounds, their community and social and family life. Okay, so here is the discussion board prompt for this week. What I'd like you to do is I'm going to read this prompt for you and the question, and you should be replying to this question in your discussion board posting. Okay, so the discussion board posting in Blackboard doesn't list this prompt. You should be getting the prompt from here and using the information that I've covered in this session so far to respond to that prompt. Okay, Yesenia is a 6-year-old English language learner who was born in the United States and is a second-generation Mexican American. She has 2 older siblings and 1 younger sibling. She attended Head Start for 1 year, where she has had some instruction in Spanish. She attended a bilingual kindergarten before moving to a school with an English as a second language only model. In other words, no Spanish support, at the beginning of 1st grade. In this English-only program, she receives ESL pull-out support. Her teacher notices that Yesenia has poor social skills, showing problems initiating interaction with other children in her class. Yesenia has difficulty entering playgroups, sometimes standing alone and watching other children play. She does not seem to use her developing English language skills to interact with other children. Her stronger language is Spanish, since this is the language that is spoken at home and the language that she has had the most input. Yesenia's progress on the curriculum-based assessment has been slow, and she is progressing slower than her peers on early literacy skills tests. Okay, here's the prompt. The teacher is considering referring Yesenia for special education testing. What recommendations would you make to the teacher in terms of aspects or factors that need further consideration in order for an appropriate decision to be taken? Again, I would like your response to be as comprehensive as possible. Think about all of the aspects that we've gone over today based on both academic, informal, in the classroom, outside the classroom, to do with the family, to do with the tests that are used, to do with the observations. All of those things should be included in your response, and you should write up that response into the discussion board for this week. Okay, again, so I'm going to review the objectives of today's session. We determine the factors that are necessary to consider when you're thinking of referring an English language learner for special education. You should be able to differentiate what's normal language acquisition from a learning disability, and to identify the normal language processes related to bilinguals. We went over some key legal rights for ELLs and special education, and we addressed the 3 phases that are included in that special education referral. We also went through the considerations of the observing team, and we recognized social and non-linguistic explanations of why English language learners might be underachieving in the classroom outside of any reasons to do with a disability. Okay, so next we're going to get into communicative competence.